health. It's all manipulation. And because they're controlling it and giving the perception of it through figures and control of figures, they can control when it goes up and when it goes down and when it comes back. And who's compiling these figures? They're being compiled worldwide and being quoted by the media worldwide by the Johns Hopkins organization in America. And 6 weeks before this outbreak became public in China, they ran a simulation of a coronavirus pandemic, which involved the Johns Hopkins organization, which is very close to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which was also involved in this simulation, and the World Economic Forum, the front for the 1%, that were running this simulation, which 6 weeks later it was another simulation, but this time it was presented as real. So wherever you look at Professor Neil Ferguson from Imperial College in London, who came out with the computer models, absolute nonsense, that 500,000 people could die in Britain and up to 2 million in America, and similar thing with other countries. And that was why we had the lockdown. People like Fauci and Birx in America have admitted that the Ferguson computer models with these projections, not reality projections, were the thing that stimulated the lockdown. And so Ferguson, you see, and Imperial College, where this came out of, are both massively financially connected and funded by Gates. So's Fauci, so's Birx, so's also Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, with the dark suits that are running the policy in Britain. The chief scientist advisor to Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, is a guy called Patrick Vallance. He was a long-time executive of GlaxoSmithKline, which is massively involved in this whole vaccine for the non-existent COVID-19. And GlaxoSmithKline has massive connections and interactions and business connections to Bill Gates. So it's a web. And the politicians are basically sidelined. What they say is, we're listening to the science. We're being driven by the science. No, you're being driven by the Gates cult agenda through the scientists. And I would take Trump more seriously in terms of his pushback on this if people like Birx and Fauci had long disappeared into history and were no longer involved in it, but they still are.
Yeah, it's crazy times. The virus is dominating everything. So I wanted to ask you, get your quick take. Maybe you've looked into this, maybe not. What's your take on the Beatles? Do you think they're just a Tavistock creation in an operation that was?
I don't know. I think that a lot of other people have specialized in this area, but the control of popular culture is very important to the cult because it leads generations into different directions that the cult wants. If you look back, and I speak as someone who grew up in the 60s. I was, early. I went in my teenage years and through my teenage years, basically in the 1960s, and I love 60s music, and I love the whole,
we do too. The Invasion, all that music.
The whole Summer of Love and all that stuff. But it was all manipulated. One of the reasons for it was to just knock out of the game a real feet on the ground opposition to the Vietnam War, and it's affected psychologically, massive numbers of that generation. And I'm sure you've read the book